Now that we understand some basic commands for Linux, it's time to look at how to edit, run, and compile simple C++ programs. The scenario I'm going to use is I have a pizza recipe that consists of flour, water, yeast, and salt. Sometimes I want to make 2 pizzas, sometimes I want to make 7 pizzas. So I want to write a program that will tell me how much of my ingredients I need given the number of pizzas that I want to make. It's a simple calculation. We'll go through it in code, but the first thing I need to do is I need to use an editor to write a C++ program. From the previous video, you know that there are 2 main editors we use, VI, which is Visual Interactive, and Emacs. At some point, you should learn one of those editors. For this demonstration, I am simply going to use Nano, which is a very simple editor, but again, not a great tool for writing code. I'm going to create the file pizza.cc. If you want to use the extension CPP, that's perfectly fine. Now at this point, I can type my program. We'll start because it's going to have some input and output using IOStream. I'm just going to put everything in the standard namespace. And I'm going to have only a main function that returns 0. Now I'm going to finish typing the program. So now I've typed out the entire program. You can see that I use 229 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, 1 gram of yeast, and 6 grams of salt. And then I prompt the user, how many pizzas do I want to make? I'm going to store that quantity in the integer variable pizzas, and I'm reading that quantity from the keyboard here, and now I'm simply printing out the amount of flour times the number of pizzas, and then I'm doing that for water, yeast, and salt. So a pretty simple program where you just have input, some processing or calculations, and then output. So now I'm going to hit Control X to exit, and you can see that I have my C++ program here in pizza.cc. Now that I've written this program, it's time for me to compile it. I'm going to use apropos to tell me what compilers I have on my machine. Here is G++, which is the C++ compiler. You can consult the man page on G++. There are many options for G++ and GCC. What is the relationship? G++ is a preprocessor for the C compiler, which is called GCC, but the command that you want to use is G++. So I'm not going to go through all the options. You can take a look at those. Now to compile, I simply say G++ and the name of my C++ program. I hit return. On a Unix machine, silence means success. If I look in my directory, you'll see that I have a new file here. If I use capital F, this is how capital F identifies this file as an executable file with the asterisk at the end. And now I can run this file by typing its name. The program prompts me, how many pizzas do I want to make? I'll make 3 pizzas. And now it tells me how much of my ingredients I need. If I want to make changes, then I need to edit my file again. Maybe I'm trying to reduce the amount of salt. So I change this from 6 to 5. Now I need to save my changes using Control O, writing it to the same file. Now I can exit using Control X. Now if I run my program again, notice that it's still using 6 grams of salt even though I changed it. Whenever you make changes to the source file, to your C++ program, you have to recompile. Remember in the previous video I told you about history. What I can do is I can type bang G. That will search through my history until it finds the first command that starts with a G, which is my compile command. Now I can run a.out. I want to make one pizza, and you can see that I'm only using now 5 grams of salt. So that's a simple introduction on how you edit, compile, and run programs on a Unix machine. What could possibly go wrong? It turns out when you're writing code, a lot can go wrong. You're going to forget to do things. You're going to misspell things. Eventually, when you get comfortable with the language, you'll be able to minimize these mistakes. But these mistakes make programming incredibly frustrating. So I'm going to take you through some of the mistakes that you might inadvertently make and show you what the compiler does that will help you understand and hopefully be able to fix your own mistakes. I'm going to use VI instead of Nano because I'm just more comfortable with VI. It'll go a lot faster. So here's my pizza calculator. Symbols come from 3 places. Either they're intrinsic to the language. So for example, const and int, those are defined keywords in the C++ language. A second place symbols come from libraries. The IOStream library defines certain symbols and constructs. For example, cout is defined in the IOStream library. Then the third place would be symbols that we define in our program. So for example, here I am defining flour and water and yeast and salt. So a lot of times, as we'll see in this demonstration, sometimes the compiler won't be able to find the definition of a symbol. And it's usually because you either messed up something with the library or you forgot to define something correctly. Let's see what happens if we forget to include the IOStream library. So I'm commenting this out, and now I'm going to compile pizza.cc. Now this is a little command line magic. The bang $sign matches with the last thing on the previous command line. Let me go back up. Notice that it ran the correct command. That's the first important thing. And now look what this is saying. This is saying cout was not declared in this scope. And then the compiler is actually kind of helping me out here. And it's saying, did you forget to include IOStream? Now, different compilers will give you different error messages. So this is something that's important to keep in mind. Sometimes your IDE, your integrated development environment, will give you messages that will help reduce your mistakes. Here's another one. CN was not declared in this scope. ENDL was not declared in this scope. All of these symbols are defined in the IOStream library. What happens if I forget to include the namespace standard? What kind of error messages do I get there? I'm going to use my command to search back through the history and execute the first command that starts with G. Again, cout was not declared in this scope. And again, it's telling me this is another way that you can write cout if you want to do it that way. Also not declared in the scope is cn. So similar messages I got when I forgot to include the IOStream library. But notice that it's not really telling me, did you forget to? I mean, it's kind of helping me. You know, you could use std::endl, which is a way of indicating that you want to use the endl that's defined in the standard namespace. What happens if I forget to define a variable like flour? Again, it's going to say on line 19, you are using flour, but flour has not been declared in the scope. It's thinking that because flour is similar to float, maybe that's what I meant to do, but that's not. Another thing you're going to do is you're going to misspell words. Let's say that I forget to type const correctly. What message do I get? It's thinking that I meant that I'm using cnst as a variable, and it's telling me that this symbol was not declared in the scope. Hopefully you recognize that you meant to say const instead of CNST. And because I made a mistake on that line, it now has not defined flower either. Usually when you get a stream of error messages like this, you want to scroll up and look at the first message, because this will cascade through the rest of the program. And you might have 50 lines of errors, but you always want to go to the top of the output and look at the first error, or start at the top and come down. You don't want to look at the last error message. You want to look at the first one. So now I can go back and fix this. Another thing I might do is misspell cout. Again, it's going to tell me that it was not declared in the scope. What happens if I leave off a semicolon? What happens? In this case, I get a pretty intuitive error message, and it's telling me that it processed this cout on the next line here. The compiler knows, because of the rules of syntax, that there should have been a semicolon before processing that cout. That was a helpful error message. Now, of course, if you make a mistake here inside a string, that's not a compiler error, that is a logical error. There are two types of mistakes that we can make. We can make a syntax error, meaning the program doesn't compile because I misspelled something, I didn't define something, I forgot a semicolon. But then there are logical errors. I misspell flower inside of a string. That is not a syntax error, it's a logical error. Another logical error I could make is what happens if instead of multiplying times flour, I make a mistake and multiply times yeast. So again, these are logical errors. My program is going to compile, and when I run it, hopefully I will notice that I made these mistakes and I can go back and fix. So it's very important to look at your program's output and confirm that it's giving you the correct answers. So now I can go check this. Compile, run, and I can confirm that that's the correct output.